January 1943. The Atlantic Ocean stretches like dark glass under a frozen winter sky. The wind is sharp, carrying salt mist across steel decks that tremble slightly beneath the weight of war. Somewhere in the vast darkness, a German U-boat cuts silently through cold water, its hull groaning under pressure as diesel engines have long since been shut down. Inside the submarine, the air is thick with sweat, oil, and the nervous breathing of 30 men trapped beneath the surface of history. They are hunting Allied convoys just as they have done for years. Above them, the ocean seems empty, no ships. No movement. Only waves rising and falling like slow, breathing giants of water and wind. Then, without warning, something changes. Radar operators on nearby escort ships detect faint echoes. Crewmen squint toward the horizon. Nothing is visible. Just gray sky merging with darker gray sea. And then, from that empty horizon, aircraft engines suddenly roar into existence. Escort carrier planes, launched miles away, are already diving toward the U-boat before its crew even hears the approaching threat. The hunters have become the hunted in silence. Depth charges will soon follow, shaking the ocean itself like thunder beneath water. The Battle of the Atlantic is no longer fought only on the surface. It is now fought in the sky above an empty horizon. The year is 1939. Europe is descending into war once again after the collapse of fragile peace following the invasion of Poland. The oceans become lifelines of survival. Britain depends on imported food, fuel, and raw materials. Without maritime supply routes, the island nation would slowly suffocate under economic blockade. Germany understands this vulnerability. The German Naval Command revives a strategy from the First World War: unrestricted submarine warfare. The goal is simple and brutal: sink merchant shipping faster than it can be replaced. The battlefield is not land. It is not air. It is water stretching across thousands of miles from North America to Europe. Early in the war, German U-boats achieved terrifying success. Wolfpack tactics become their signature doctrine. Groups of submarines stalk convoys at night, communicating via encrypted radio signals. When one submarine finds a convoy, it summons others like predators circling wounded prey. The night ocean becomes a hunting ground where radar technology is still primitive and convoy escorts are limited in number. By 1940 and 1941, Allied shipping losses reach catastrophic levels. British merchant tonnage sinks faster than new ships can be built. Some months see hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping disappear beneath waves. Winston Churchill famously later described the U-boat threat as the greatest danger facing Britain's survival. Every convoy lost meant fewer soldiers could be supplied in North Africa, fewer civilians could be fed, and fewer weapons could reach European battlefronts. At this stage of the war, German submariners feel dominant. Many U-boat commanders become national heroes. Their success depends on stealth, darkness, and patience. Submarines typically operate at night on the surface using diesel engines to recharge batteries, then dive during daylight to avoid detection. Radar technology is still developing and sonar detection is limited by ocean noise and weather interference. But the Allies are not standing still. British and American naval scientists begin accelerating research into electronic detection systems. Radar becomes smaller, more reliable, and capable of spotting even low silhouettes moving across water. The British also established the convoy system, grouping merchant ships together, with military escorts rather than allowing them to sail alone. While this makes ships easier to protect, it also makes them easier to find if enemy reconnaissance succeeds. The turning point begins not with ships, but with factories and research laboratories. In the United States, industrial production starts transforming the war economy. Shipyards work around the clock producing Liberty ships. Simple, fast-to-build cargo vessels designed to replace losses faster than Germany can sink them. This is industrial warfare at its most fundamental level: production speed versus destruction speed. Yet, even with improved convoy protection, one problem remains unsolved. Convoys moving across the vast Atlantic still have gaps in air coverage. Long-range patrol aircraft can protect coastal waters, but the Middle Ocean remains dangerously exposed. U-boats exploit this air gap, a zone where Allied aircraft cannot reach. Within this gap, submarines feel almost untouchable. This vulnerability forces the Allies to rethink naval warfare completely. Instead of relying solely on land-based airfields, they begin deploying a revolutionary concept: escort carriers. These are smaller aircraft carriers designed specifically to travel with convoys. Unlike large fleet carriers, escort carriers are cheaper, faster to build, and capable of launching patrol aircraft directly from convoy formations. These escort carriers change the psychological balance of warfare. U-boat crews begin realizing something terrifying. The ocean is no longer safe just because no ships are visible on the surface. Aircraft can now appear suddenly, launched from ships hidden behind the curve of the Earth. The sky becomes an extension of naval combat. By 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic shifts dramatically. German intelligence still struggles to adapt to Allied radio interception breakthroughs like the British Ultra Code-Breaking program, which allows Allied convoys to sometimes avoid U-boat patrol zones entirely. German command structures become increasingly frustrated as losses rise. Submarine crews begin reporting growing anxiety. Patrol missions last longer. Supplies run lower. Depth charge attacks become more frequent and more precise. What began as a war of stealth is slowly becoming a war of detection. And as 1943 progresses, a new kind of threat emerges for German submariners: aircraft that can appear from beyond visual range, launched from escort carriers traveling with convoys. These ships do not need coastal air bases. They bring air power directly into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. This new technology will soon turn empty horizons into deadly ambush zones for U-boat crews who once believed the Atlantic was their hunting ground. By mid-1943, naval warfare over the Atlantic Ocean is no longer decided purely by ship-to-ship combat. It is decided by technology, engineering, and information intelligence. The Allies understand that control of the Atlantic supply routes is essential for preparing future land invasions in Europe. Without safe transport lanes, large-scale offensives cannot be sustained. Escort carriers begin appearing in increasing numbers across Allied convoys. These ships are smaller than traditional fleet carriers, usually converted from merchant hulls or built quickly using simplified designs. They carry fewer aircraft, sometimes only 15 to 30 planes, but their strategic value is enormous. Their purpose is not to engage enemy fleets directly. Instead, they provide constant aerial patrol coverage over convoys. When convoy formations sail across the Atlantic, escort carriers operate like moving airfields. Aircraft can be launched repeatedly during daylight hours to conduct reconnaissance patrols, search for submarine periscopes, and attack surfaced U-boats attempting to recharge batteries. One of the most feared aircraft deployed from these carriers is the American Grumman Wildcat and later the Grumman Avenger. Torpedo bomber. These aircraft are specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. They carry depth bombs, rockets and torpedoes capable of damaging or destroying submarines even if they attempt emergency dives. Radar technology becomes equally revolutionary. Early war radar systems were large and unreliable. By 1943, miniaturization allows radar systems to be installed directly on aircraft. This allows pilots to detect U-boats even at night or in poor weather conditions. Previously, submarines relied heavily on darkness and fog for protection. Now, those advantages begin disappearing. German U-boat commanders initially underestimate escort carrier aircraft. They assume that air patrols must originate from distant land bases. This assumption proves deadly. The psychological impact on submarine crews begins growing stronger than the physical danger itself. Imagine being inside a metal cylinder under hundreds of feet of water. The crew cannot see above them. They can only hear sonar pulses and distant explosions traveling through water like distant thunder. Sonar detection also improves. Allied destroyers and escort ships begin using more advanced hydrophone systems capable of detecting subtle engine vibrations. Even silent trunning submarines can sometimes be tracked through water turbulence patterns left behind by propellers. Communication warfare becomes another battlefield. The Allied code-breaking program dramatically improves convoy safety. By intercepting German naval communications, Allied command centers can redirect convoys away from known wolfpack concentrations. This transforms convoy defense from reactive defense into predictive defense. German naval command struggles to adapt. Admiral Karl Dönitz continues to push aggressive submarine deployment strategies, believing that overwhelming numbers can still break Allied shipping lines. However, industrial reality begins working against Germany. The United States enters full wartime production mode, building ships, aircraft, and naval escorts at unprecedented speed. The Atlantic becomes a technological arms race. On one side, German engineers attempt to improve submarine stealth and underwater endurance. New snorkel breathing systems are tested, allowing submarines to run diesel engines while partially submerged. But these systems are still unreliable and difficult to mass produce. On the other side, Allied aircraft range is increasing. New long-range patrol planes like the consolidated B-24 Liberator begin covering previously unreachable ocean zones. These aircraft help close the infamous Atlantic air gap that once allowed U-boats to operate freely. By late 1943, U-boat losses begin accelerating dramatically. Entire wolf packs are sometimes wiped out during single convoy engagements. Allied escort carriers and long-range aircraft coordinate attacks using radio communication and improved tactical doctrines. The ocean battlefield changes emotionally as well. Allied sailors begin feeling increasing confidence. German submarine crews, once celebrated as elite warriors, start feeling hunted rather than hunting. Reports from captured submariners later described growing fear of sudden daylight attacks from aircraft that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Convoy battles become deadly choreography. Escort destroyers form protective rings around merchant ships. Escort carriers stay slightly behind convoys, launching aircraft in rotating patrol patterns to maintain constant surveillance. Yet despite technological advantages, warfare remains brutal. Depth charges explode underwater. Survivors sometimes describe the sound as if giant hands were squeezing the ocean itself. By the end of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic is reaching its most decisive phase. The German Navy still fights aggressively. When aircraft appear from what seems like empty sky and empty horizon, the stage is set for tactical confrontation between human endurance, engineering, and military leadership decisions that will determine control of the Atlantic shipping routes. Inside a German U-boat during 1943, warfare is no longer just about weapons. It is about survival under pressure. Submarines are mechanical coffins moving through an ocean that does not forgive mistakes. The men inside live in constant sensory tension. Every sound, vibration, and shadow can mean life or death. A typical U-boat patrol could last 6 to 10 weeks. During this time, crews rarely see sunlight. Air inside submarines becomes heavy with diesel fumes, sweat, and recycled oxygen. Cigarette smoking is restricted because it consumes precious breathable air. Yet many sailors still smoke secretly during night watches, hoping to calm their nerves. The psychological pressure begins long before combat even starts. Crew members know that Allied patrol aircraft may appear suddenly. The most terrifying moment is not attack itself, it is the silence before attack. When engines suddenly stop, and the crew hears only the distant hum of propellers through water, they know detection has likely occurred. When escort carrier aircraft began entering Atlantic battles, German submariners started reporting a new kind of fear. These aircraft did not follow traditional patterns. Earlier in the war, air patrols could be predicted based on coastal range limitations. But escort carriers allowed aircraft to appear in the middle of convoy routes, far from land. Imagine being a sonar operator inside a submerged submarine. The operator wears headphones, listening for distant propeller sounds. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched noise appears. It grows louder. Then comes the unmistakable sound of aircraft engines vibrating through water pressure waves. The crew knows that if they can hear the aircraft, it may already be too late. Submarine commanders must make rapid decisions under pressure. Should they remain submerged and risk oxygen depletion? Or should they attempt emergency surfacing maneuvers to fire anti-aircraft guns and fight back? Most of the time, staying submerged is safer, but slower dives increase vulnerability to depth charges. Depth charge attacks create intense psychological trauma. The explosions do not just damage ships. They shake human bodies. Water transmits shockwaves efficiently, causing internal injuries. Panic reactions and equipment malfunctions. Some sailors reported temporary deafness after repeated attacks. Leadership inside submarines becomes extremely important. U-boat commanders must remain calm even when their crew is terrified. Panic spreads quickly in confined environments. One frightened crew member can disrupt operational efficiency for everyone. Allied naval crews also experience psychological strain. Escort carrier pilots fly long patrol missions over endless ocean horizons. Many pilots describe the Atlantic as visually hypnotic waves repeating endlessly like moving gray mountains. The challenge is maintaining focus while searching for something as small as a submarine periscope. Technological warfare begins shaping human behavior. Radar operators sit in dark rooms watching glowing screens, waiting for tiny blips that could represent enemy submarines. Their work requires patience and intense concentration. A missed signal could mean a convoy ship sinking. Another psychological factor is isolation. U-boat crews operate far from home for extended periods. Letters from families arrive rarely. German naval propaganda attempts to maintain morale by celebrating submarine victories, but losses slowly erode confidence. Allied intelligence operations also target morale. Radio broadcasts and propaganda leaflets sometimes describe German naval losses to discourage enemy crews. Knowledge that other U-boats are being destroyed increases fear during patrol missions. Weather plays an emotional role as well. Storms can be both blessing and curse. Rough seas make sonar detection difficult, but storms also make rescue operations nearly impossible if submarines are damaged. The Atlantic becomes a psychological battlefield where survival depends on discipline, training, and emotional control. The introduction of escort carrier aircraft changes everything because it removes the illusion of safety. Submarine crews realize they can be attacked from sky, surface, and underwater simultaneously. By late 1943, some German submarine commanders begin reporting declining morale among new recruits. Experienced sailors understand the risks. New recruits sometimes panic during first combat encounters. This shift in psychology directly affects tactical performance. Panic can cause mistakes during emergency dive procedures. A single delayed valve operation could slow submarine descent speed by several seconds, enough time for aircraft to release depth charges accurately. The human story of this war is not only about victory or defeat. It is about endurance under invisible pressure. And while psychology shapes survival, technology shapes how long survival remains possible in battle. Next, the war at sea also becomes a story of tactical warfare evolution, where technology, strategy, and leadership decisions decide which side controls the Atlantic hunting zones. By 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic transforms from a traditional naval chase into a deadly game of detection and counter-detection. The German U-boat strategy is built on stealth and surprise. The Allied strategy becomes built on visibility, communication, and overwhelming coordination. German submarines rely heavily on surface travel during night operations. When on the surface, the U-boats move faster using diesel engines while simultaneously charging batteries. This gives them speed advantages compared to fully submerged operation. However, surface travel also makes them vulnerable to radar detection. Escort carrier aircraft change this balance dramatically. Aircraft equipped with airborne radar can now detect the metallic silhouette of submarines even in darkness or bad weather. Once detected, attack becomes rapid and precise. One of the most important tactical developments is hunter-killer groups. Instead of just defending convoys, Allied naval forces begin actively hunting submarines. These groups usually consist of an escort carrier accompanied by destroyers and smaller escort ships. The tactical method is coordinated warfare. Aircraft patrol ahead of convoys searching large ocean areas. When a submarine is spotted, aircraft attack immediately to force the submarine to dive. Once the submarine is underwater, destroyers move in using sonar tracking to drop depth charges. Depth charge tactics also evolve. Early in the war, depth charges were dropped in patterns hoping to damage submarines by chance. By 1943, attack patterns become scientifically calculated. Depth charges are set to explode at specific underwater depths based on sonar readings. German U-boat engineers attempt countermeasures. One major development is acoustic torpedoes designed to home in on destroyer propeller noise. These torpedoes initially achieve some success against Allied escort ships. However, Allied forces quickly developed countermeasures such as towed noise decoys called Foxers, which create artificial sound signatures to confuse torpedoes. Another technological battlefield is encryption warfare. The German Navy uses the Enigma encryption machine to secure communications between submarines and command headquarters. However, Allied intelligence cryptanalysis units continue making progress in decoding German messages. This allows Allied convoys to sometimes change routes before attacks occur. Tactically, convoy defense formations become more sophisticated. Merchant ships sail in tighter formations with overlapping defensive gun coverage. Escort ships patrol in zigzag patterns around convoys, making it harder for submarines to predict movement paths. Weather forecasting also becomes a tactical weapon. Allied meteorological units track Atlantic weather patterns to predict when submarines will surface to recharge batteries. Bad weather often provides temporary protection for U-boats, but it also reduces their operational visibility. Air power range is another critical tactical factor. The development of long-range patrol aircraft allows continuous surveillance. Aircraft, such as modified bombers, can carry extra fuel tanks, extending patrol duration to cover previously unreachable ocean zones. German tactical adaptation focuses on improving submarine stealth technology. The development of snorkel systems allows submarines to operate diesel engines while remaining partially submerged. This reduces exposure time on the surface but creates new risks because snorkels can still be detected by radar waves reflecting off the metal structure. Leadership strategy differences also shape tactical outcomes. Allied naval command prioritizes centralized coordination between air, sea, and intelligence units. German command structure often struggles with communication delays due to radio, encryption, and operational secrecy protocols. By mid to late 1943, convoy battles become extremely fast-paced. Engagements can happen within minutes. Aircraft may strike first, forcing submarines to dive. Destroyers then pursue underwater targets using sonar tracking. If submarines surface, aircraft attack again. This constant pressure creates operational exhaustion for German crews. Submarine patrols become longer but less effective. Wolfpack formations become harder to organize because Allied intelligence often detects convoy movements in advance. Strategically, the Atlantic becomes a war of production and endurance. Germany cannot replace lost submarines and trained crews as quickly as the United States and Britain can produce ships, aircraft, and trained personnel. The technological gap between Allied and German naval warfare continues widening. The Allies combine engineering innovation with intelligence warfare, while Germany struggles to maintain operational momentum under increasing losses. This tactical and technological struggle will soon reach its most decisive moment, when direct battles between aircraft and U-boats will determine control of Atlantic shipping routes in dramatic, violent encounters. Late 1943, the Atlantic Ocean becomes colder as winter approaches. Storm clouds gather low over the water, turning daylight into a permanent twilight of gray skies and dark waves. Convoy ships move slowly, heavily loaded with soldiers, ammunition, and supplies destined for the European front. This is the moment both sides have been preparing for. On one side, German U-boats wait beneath waves like predators holding their breath. On the other side, Allied escort carriers steam steadily with convoy formations, their flight decks ready to launch aircraft at a moment's notice. The turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic is not one battle. It is a series of deadly encounters across weeks and months, each one slowly breaking the German submarine offensive. One of the most feared experiences for U-boat crews during this period is sudden daylight aircraft attack. Earlier in the war, submarines could operate safely on the surface during daytime if far from coastal patrol zones. Now, escort carrier aircraft can launch patrol missions directly above convoy formations. Imagine the scene inside a German submarine patrolling somewhere in the North Atlantic in 1943. The sonar operator is listening. Only faint mechanical echoes of distant propellers. The submarine is running at periscope depth, trying to maintain visual contact with convoy ships. Then suddenly, the radio operator receives a warning transmission from another U-boat patrol zone. Aircraft sighted. Multiple aircraft heading toward convoy coordinates. Inside the submarine, tension becomes unbearable. The commander orders immediate dive procedures. Dive, dive, dive. Hatches are sealed. Ballast tanks flood with seawater. The submarine begins descending deeper into the ocean darkness. But above them, Allied aircraft have already spotted them. Aircraft pilots search for small disturbances on the ocean surface. A submarine does not need to be fully visible to be detected. Sometimes just a trail of disturbed waves or an oil slick leaking from engine systems is enough. Within minutes, aircraft begin attacking. Depth charges fall from the sky like metal thunderbolts. When they explode underwater, shock waves ripple outward violently. The explosions create pressure waves that travel through submarine hulls. Inside the submarine, lights flicker, equipment rattles. Crew members hold onto walls as the vessel shakes violently. This is the terror of underwater warfare. German U-boat commanders must make impossible decisions. Stay submerged and risk oxygen depletion, or attempt emergency surface escape and face aircraft machine gun fire and bombs. Many submarines attempt zigzag escape dives, but Allied pilots have improved attack patterns. Instead of dropping depth charges randomly, pilots now attack in coordinated strike runs. One aircraft forces the submarine to change direction. Another aircraft immediately attacks predicted movement paths. This tactical coordination dramatically increases submarine kill rates. By early 1944, German submarine losses begin accelerating dramatically. Entire patrol groups are sometimes destroyed during single convoy encounters. The Atlantic is no longer a hunting zone. It has become a battlefield where submarines are hunted like prey. One of the most devastating moments for German submarine warfare occurs when escort carrier task forces begin operating independently of convoys. These hunter-killer groups actively search for submarines rather than waiting for them to attack. These groups use layered detection tactics. Aircraft patrol large areas first. If a submarine is detected, destroyer escorts move in to finish the engagement using sonar-guided attacks. German Naval Command attempts countermeasures. Submarines begin operating in deeper waters to avoid sonar detection. Some attempt to travel extremely slowly to reduce acoustic signatures. Others attempt traveling underwater for longer periods using battery power alone. But batteries cannot last forever. Eventually, submarines must surface to recharge, and that is when aircraft strike. Survivors of these encounters later describe seeing aircraft appear suddenly from clouds or sunlight reflections. The sky becomes a battlefield as much as the ocean. Allied naval strategy is now based on constant pressure. Never allow submarines to feel safe. Attack repeatedly. Force exhaustion. Force mistakes. Strategically, this approach works. German submarine production cannot keep up with losses. Experienced crews are particularly difficult to replace. Because submarine warfare requires specialized training and psychological resilience. By mid-1944, U-boat patrol effectiveness drops significantly. The Atlantic supply routes become safer for Allied transport ships. This turning point will soon lead to total strategic collapse of German submarine dominance in the Atlantic. But before that happens, the war will reach its most brutal and decisive confrontation, when German submarine crews face near-constant air attacks across multiple convoy battles, pushing them toward operational desperation. By mid to late 1944, the Atlantic Ocean is no longer a battlefield of uncertainty. It is a battlefield of dominance. The Allies are now hunting U-boats faster than Germany can deploy them. Convoy battles during this period become extremely one-sided. Allied hunter-killer groups operate with deadly efficiency. Escort carriers maintain continuous air patrol cycles. When one group of aircraft returns to refuel, another squadron is already airborne, ensuring that there is never a moment when the convoy is completely unprotected. German U-boat commanders begin reporting something terrifying in their war diaries. They are being found too quickly. Previously, U-boats could approach convoys undetected, fire torpedoes, and retreat into darkness. Now, radar-equipped aircraft can detect submarine periscopes from miles away. Torpedo attacks also become less effective. Allied ships improve evasive maneuver tactics. When radar or aircraft warnings are received, convoys begin executing emergency zigzag movements. This makes it extremely difficult for submarine torpedoes to calculate accurate interception paths. Some German submarines attempt surface torpedo attacks at night. These attacks are faster but risk detection by radar-equipped patrol aircraft. One particularly dangerous development is the use of night fighter aircraft adapted for maritime warfare. These aircraft can operate during darkness, eliminating one of the last advantages submarines once had. The psychological pressure on submarine crews reaches extreme levels. Imagine a patrol mission lasting weeks without success. Fuel reserves are running low. Food supplies are rationed. The air inside submarines becomes stale and humid. Then sonar operators suddenly detect aircraft engines overhead. The commander orders immediate dive, but sometimes it is already too late. Depth charges explode in patterns designed for maximum destructive coverage. Instead of random drops, Allied destroyers now use calculated attack grids. These grids create overlapping explosion zones underwater. Even if a submarine avoids one explosion, pressure waves from another nearby explosion can still damage hull structures or disrupt internal equipment systems. By late 1944, German Naval Command begins withdrawing surviving U-boats from heavily defended convoy routes. Submarines are reassigned to patrol more remote ocean zones where Allied air coverage is weaker. But by this point, the strategic damage is already done. Allied forces have secured the Atlantic shipping lanes needed to prepare for major European invasions. Supplies, soldiers, and equipment flow steadily across the ocean. German naval leadership becomes increasingly defensive rather than offensive. U-boat production continues, but experienced crews are increasingly rare. Training programs cannot replace battlefield experience. New recruits often face combat situations without full preparation, increasing casualty rates. Meanwhile, Allied production continues accelerating. Escort carriers are now being produced in larger numbers. Air patrol doctrine becomes standardized across naval fleets. One of the final strategic failures of German U-boat warfare is fuel logistics. Submarines require fuel not only for patrol missions, but also for return journeys to safe ports. Allied bombing campaigns targeting fuel storage facilities further weaken operational range. Some German submarines attempt extremely long endurance missions, staying submerged for extended periods. However, battery limitations and crew health risks make these missions extremely dangerous. The Atlantic has effectively turned into a controlled Allied maritime highway. By 1945, Germany can no longer threaten Allied shipping routes in the Atlantic with significant strategic impact. The U-boat offensive that once nearly starved Britain into submission has been neutralized through technology, intelligence warfare, and industrial production superiority. The final battles of the Atlantic are no longer about control, they are about survival. By 1945, the Atlantic War shifts from active combat to strategic aftermath analysis. The results of years of naval warfare become painfully clear for Germany Naval Command. The once feared submarine fleet of the Kriegsmarine has suffered devastating operational losses. Between 1939 and 1945, German U-boat losses reach catastrophic levels. Historical records estimate that out of roughly 1,100 submarines deployed during the war, more than 700 are destroyed in combat operations. Thousands of submariners are lost at sea. Many submarines sink with entire crews trapped inside metal hulls thousands of feet below ocean surfaces. Allied shipping losses tell a different story. Early in the war, Allied merchant shipping losses were severe. In 1940 and 1941, Germany nearly succeeded in isolating United Kingdom from global trade networks. At the height of U-boat success, Allied shipping losses sometimes exceeded 500,000 tons per month. But by 1944, the situation reverses dramatically. Allied convoy protection systems, escort carriers, and long-range patrol aircraft reduce shipping losses to manageable levels. Supply routes across the Atlantic become stable enough to support large-scale military operations, including preparations for the European mainland invasion campaigns. Strategically, the loss of U-boat effectiveness represents a shift in naval warfare history. Submarine warfare alone can no longer decide global maritime control. Technology and industry now determine battlefield success more than individual naval bravery. Another major statistic involves personnel training and experience gaps. Germany struggles to replace veteran submarine commanders. Experienced U-boat officers were often killed in combat, leaving new recruits with less tactical knowledge. This reduced operational effectiveness across patrol missions. The psychological cost of war also becomes measurable. Post-war reports describe surviving submariners suffering from severe combat stress disorders. Many veterans reported long-term trauma from repeated depth-charge attacks and underwater explosions. Meanwhile, Allied naval losses were significantly lower than German expectations. While many merchant ships were sunk early in the war, industrial production ensured continuous replacement. This economic resilience became one of the most decisive factors in Allied victory. Naval historians later described this phase of the war as the defeat of submarine warfare as a strategic weapon. Submarines remained useful, but they could no longer threaten global supply chains in the way Germany had hoped. The Atlantic shipping corridor becomes a symbol of Allied logistical supremacy. With the Atlantic secured, Allied forces can now transport millions of soldiers, vehicles, and supplies across oceans with relative safety. This directly supports major land operations that would eventually lead to the collapse of German military resistance in Europe. The Atlantic Naval War thus ends not with one final battle, but with slow strategic suffocation of submarine offensive power. The oceans return to Allied control, and the technology developed during this conflict will permanently change naval warfare doctrine for generations. The end of World War II does not end the impact of the Atlantic naval battles. Instead, it transforms global naval warfare forever. The technologies developed during these battles become the foundation of modern maritime defense doctrine. Radar technology becomes one of the most important wartime legacies. By 1945, radar systems are smaller, more accurate, and capable of detecting objects far beyond visual range. Post-war navies around the world begin installing advanced radar systems on almost every major warship and patrol aircraft. Sonar technology also advances rapidly. Wartime sonar improvements allow submarines and surface ships to detect underwater movement with greater precision. These technologies later evolve into modern underwater surveillance networks used during the Cold War era. The concept of air-sea integration becomes permanent military doctrine. The success of escort carriers proves that naval warfare is no longer dominated solely by battleships. Aircraft carriers become the new center of naval power. Large fleet carriers replace traditional battleship-centered fleets. Military strategists realize that air superiority often determines naval superiority. The industrial lessons of the war also reshape global military economics. Countries learn that wartime victory depends heavily on production capacity. The United States emerges as the dominant naval industrial power. Its ability to produce ships, aircraft, and weapons faster than enemies can destroy them becomes a defining strategic advantage. Submarine design also evolves after the war. German engineers, despite defeat, contribute indirectly to future submarine technology. Advanced submarine designs focus on deeper underwater operation, quieter propulsion systems, and improved crew survival conditions. These designs later influence Cold War submarine development programs. Post-war naval strategy shifts from large surface battles toward stealth and surveillance warfare. Instead of massive fleet engagements, modern warfare emphasizes detection, intelligence gathering, and precision strikes. The psychological lessons of submarine warfare also influence military training programs. Navies around the world begin implementing improved crew rotation systems, mental health monitoring, and stress management training. Former wartime commanders later published strategic analyses describing the Atlantic War as a turning point in military history. The conflict demonstrated that technology, industry, and intelligence could defeat even the most aggressive tactical strategies. Civilian maritime trade also benefits from wartime innovations. Improved navigation systems, communication radios, and weather forecasting technology make global shipping safer and more efficient. Politically, the defeat of German naval power contributes to the collapse of Axis maritime strategy. Without control of Atlantic shipping routes, Germany cannot sustain long-distance military supply operations. The war also marks the beginning of a new era in global geopolitics. Naval power shifts from European dominance toward global superpower competition. particularly between the United States and future rival states during the Cold War. The Atlantic Ocean, once a deadly battlefield filled with invisible submarines and sudden aerial ambush, gradually returns to its role as a commercial and transportation corridor connecting continents. Yet the legacy of this war remains permanent. The empty horizon that once terrified submarine crews becomes a symbol of modern surveillance warfare, where danger can appear from anywhere, even when the sky and ocean seem completely empty. War at sea changed forever during the Battle of the Atlantic. Before this conflict, naval warfare was measured by visible strength, battleships firing cannons across open water, fleets confronting each other directly. But this war was different. It was a war of invisibility, technology, and endurance. For German U-boat crews, the Atlantic became a place of fear rather than dominance. The ocean that once protected submarines became a hunting ground filled with radar waves, sonar pulses, and aircraft engines appearing suddenly from distant skies. The empty horizon was no longer empty. For Allied sailors and pilots, victory came not from single heroic battles, but from patience. Long patrol flights over endless gray water, long convoy escorts across dangerous shipping routes. Quiet vigilance replaced dramatic naval duels. This war demonstrated a new reality of modern warfare. Industrial capacity could defeat tactical bravery alone. Intelligence networks could save more lives than battlefield heroics. Technology could change the meaning of courage itself. Millions of lives depended on unseen work. Factory laborers building ships, code breakers decoding encrypted messages, engineers improving radar systems. The war was not only fought on ocean waves, it was fought in research laboratories, shipyards, and radio rooms. The Atlantic battles also taught humanity about survival under pressure. Submarine crews survived by discipline and teamwork. Allied crews survived by coordination and planning. Both sides showed extraordinary human resilience under extreme conditions. Today, naval historians view the Atlantic conflict as one of the most important technological wars in history. It shaped modern naval aviation, submarine warfare, and global supply chain security strategies. The empty horizon remains symbolic. It represents both danger and protection. It reminds humanity that wars are not always decided by visible enemies. Sometimes victory comes from seeing what cannot be seen. And in the silence of the Atlantic Ocean, the echoes of engines, explosions, and distant aircraft slowly faded into history. But the lessons of that war continue to travel across the world, like ripples across endless water.